Expert financial information, none of the awkward. Just Ask is Best Eggs video series where we ask experts the most important questions you want to know or might be afraid to just ask. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our host, Sabrina DeVito.
Today we have Pete Klipa from the National Foundation of Credit Counseling joining us so that we can talk a little bit about how you might think about paying bills and managing debt if you experience a sudden drop or loss of income. So Pete, again, we're delighted to have you here with us today. I'd love to get started by having you share a little bit about yourself and your organization with our viewers.
Absolutely. Hi, Sabrina, and hello, everyone. My name is Pete Klipa, and I am the Senior Vice President for Creditor Relations at the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, or NFCC, as we're sometimes known. I've been in this role for going on 3 years, and I joined the NFCC coming out of a background working in collections and recovery roles with various creditors. I had worked for a period of time with American Credit Acceptance, a auto lender. I spent a bulk of my career with Discover Card in roles where I was responsible for third-party collection vendors, legal vendors, as well as collection agencies. And before that, I was in credit and collections with NiSource, a public utility in the Midwest. And really, during all of these stops, we had interfaces with credit counseling agencies. They helped us in various ways. One thing that happened when I was with the public utility, the credit counseling agencies used to assist with getting people enrolled in LIHEAP and various types of public assistance that helped consumers and helped the utility. In credit card, when I was at Discover, we used credit counseling agencies to assist with workout programs on credit cards when they were building delinquencies and were in need of hardship relief. And in the auto industry, many of the people that we dealt with in that space in subprime auto lending had some difficulty where they needed some help to keep those loans current. So I'm very familiar with the services that credit counseling provides, and that was one of the things that made it attractive to come into this role where I could assist with creditor relations. In my role, I serve as a liaison between major creditors who are credit card issuers and our member agencies. The NFCC has about 60 member agencies across the country. We have more than 1,000 trained and certified credit counselors, and they are available to help people who have needs and have questions related to their credit situation. Many credit situations are unique, but our counseling population is well trained and equipped to help people best navigate that environment. And I think the important thing when it comes to interfacing with an NFCC agency is to get started. There are experts out there who can help, and your situation, no matter how dire it may seem, typically has some solutions.
Awesome. So let me start by just asking you a basic question. So in your organization's experience, when do people who experience a sudden loss of income typically start feeling the pinch and start taking action?
A lot of folks that encounter delinquency, they get behind in their fares. Oftentimes it's accompanied with embarrassment. In some cases, somebody's dealing with that situation for the first time, and it may be, due to circumstances completely outside of their control. One of the things that we're all dealing with right now is some of the difficulties that have been created as a result of the COVID-19 virus. So people are encountering job loss, increase in expenses, maybe reduced hours on their job, all related to something that nobody had ever heard about, 4 or 5 months ago. So as they get into these situations for the first time, it's typical for people to maybe try to use their credit cards to buoy them through that situation until a period of time when they hope to return to normalcy. That happens, and that is somewhat of the typical reaction. But unfortunately, sometimes people can get too far behind and they get in over their head, and then they need some help. Our word of advice would be, if you're encountering a hardship, to maybe not wait so long to speak with a credit counseling entity so that you can begin the process of getting adjustments that are approved by your creditor. It's a way to get started before balances build too large with interest and time that goes by.
Interesting. Do you have a sense of like how long, let's just say after they know that they're encountering some financial challenges, how long typically until they will reach out for help?
I think that the average is probably somewhere between 60 and 90 days behind, somewhere in that window. We do occasionally run into people who are basically current or maybe just 30 days behind. And then we also have people that come to us that they've already been through most of the delinquency cycle, and they may even be encountering accounts that are charged off. So our counselors are really dealing with folks are along a wide variety of perspectives, and there's different solutions for different people who bring different things to the table based on their situation. But the good news is there are solutions out there, and there's usually a way to navigate the best path, based on that combination of things that the consumer may bring. But the general rule is the earlier you can start, the better, because you have more options at your disposal.
Gotcha. So once somebody finds their way to credit counseling, what are some of the first steps that you would take with someone who has reached out for help?
Right. Our agencies are continuing to evolve in some of their technological savvy that they bring to the table. But one of the things that we encourage our agencies to do is to try to do as much as they can to automate the process of engagement with consumers, at least at first, so that some basic information can be collected around that consumer situation. So in our best examples, we have agencies who are already beginning to collect that information on a consumer so that they can have some of the basic information before they get into a more detailed discussion around helping that consumer. The NFCC is assisted in this as well, because we have the ability to connect with consumers on our website, where we can begin to collect information about them even before they've had a formal referral to one of our member agencies. And there's a couple of things that are beneficial about this. It enables our agencies to begin to get the basics around a consumer, which will help us best navigate that consumer situation. The second part of it is, and consumers really like this, is they begin to engage and solve on their individual problem without having to necessarily face somebody right away. Some of those basic questions are done, over the computer, let's say, and as they do that, they begin to feel more empowered about their situation without having to encounter, some of those things that are more personal in nature.
Interesting. So assuming then you've collected some initial information about them, and this is a person who cannot afford to make full payments of all of their obligations. So what do you advise them to do? How would one prioritize what bills and debts they should pay if they're not able to cover all their expenses?
Right. Very common situation. And what we do is, it's really a holistic type of interview with the person once they engage with a credit counselor. The credit counselors, what they do once the person expresses some interest in going beyond that initial step of data collection, there's an interview that's set up, and the overwhelming majority of these are done over the phone. So it can be done, just like we're doing today. Some have video capability, some don't. but there's an engagement where there's a discussion around some of that basic information that the consumer may have entered on that initial form. And then from there, the interview goes more comprehensive. It looks top to bottom at their income, their expenses, their assets, their liabilities. There's a very comprehensive collection and review of that information. That is very important so that we understand the entirety of their debt and also their incomes. And this even gets to the detail level of Social Security and alimony and all the different inputs and variables that go into that equation. Our counselors have consumer information systems that collect this information and then start to begin to service with solutions that are individual to that consumer situation. And there's a means test to the review that goes on, and that enables the counselor to talk with the person about tips where they might be able to save some money on food, or maybe something like a cable expense or a car payment. There's a lot of different things that need to be addressed as part of that. There's also the whole question around budgeting, and I think we know that there are many people out there that don't have a great handle on personal finance. It's not a skill that's necessarily taught well in school, and it's not always passed on, to kids from parents and things like that. So sometimes people can run into credit difficulty, and as part of our review of their financial situation, it offers the opportunity to provide some tried and true budgeting advice, because that's really important at the heart of it. If somebody doesn't learn those budget basics, they're more apt to go back into situations of overspending and misspending of funds that maybe got them into this in the first place. Now, while we have some of that goes on with people where they have problems maybe of their own making with their handling of their expenses, we also encounter a lot of people who are coming into medical debt as a difficulty, or maybe have been served with a domestic situation like divorce that changes their income equation, and all of a sudden they're left holding the bag on a lot of expenses. So these are common, and to the degree that the credit counselor can begin to really dive in and understand those, the solutions become more obvious as part of this process. And typically this interview process is completed in less than an hour's time. So it's very valuable, and in some cases, serves as a real life change for consumers that come into the process. So as they go through this process, they take this hour or so. At the end of that hour, all consumers that come to credit counseling and receive this service are provided with an action plan. So they don't always get on bank-approved programs as part of this counseling process, but everybody leaves with an action plan. And that action plan will come to them irrespective if they have any ability to afford the monthly charges that are necessary for that plan to go forward in some kind of bank approval. So, because we're nonprofits, we provide this service to everybody that comes in. And if they can afford it, if they can help us defray the cost of that, then great. If not, we provide that service to all who come.
Interesting. So let me just ask you a side question, which is, have you found a method of budgeting that you feel like most people that come to you, are able to do and keep up with? Like, to your point, so many people lack that skill. I'm just curious, are there practices around budgeting that you have found to be more successful than others?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with organization. It starts with really being able to understand, your income and your expense situation. At the heart of it, if people don't have that grip on the intakes and the outtakes, then they really are heading to a situation where they could either have a surplus or won't have enough. So credit counseling will lend itself to that process through the data collection that occurs, and to the degree that that information is available and close at hand, it makes the discussion and the solution that much more complete. If there are a lot of gaps in that, then the counselor may need to spend a little bit more time. It may result in a subsequent call where some of that information needs to be pulled together in order to provide the most sound advice. But at the end of the day, if it's identified that there are expense management issues that need to be addressed, we have some rule of thumb things that we can do to step in and provide some advice for people. And living within their means, living within a budget, is a small success that can be built on that actually makes that consumer better equipped to go forward. And the nice thing about the service that we provide, and one of the reasons why the banks are very supportive of it, is that it allows that person to become a better consumer for those bank entities going forward. So to the degree that we're able to help people and rehabilitate people, they're in a better position to receive credit in the future.
Gotcha. So once you have a clear view of a person's budget, are there obvious places where they can reduce expenses permanently or even temporarily? And how would one go about actually reducing those expenses?
Right. Well, one of the things, that happens fundamentally in credit counseling is when there is, an effective combination that we can recommend for this person with their credit card companies and with their other lenders who participate in credit counseling debt management plans, there's the opportunity to get them on these hardship plans to reduce the amount of that interest. So, typical credit card interest rates and even installment lending rates can approach, high teens or even into the 20% APR level, depending on delinquency. It goes consistent with the pricing schedule that a consumer establishes when they go into contract with that lender. And with credit card companies, oftentimes, if you use the card, you're signing up to that pricing schedule over, the long-term period. So while people may not spend the time to really understand that fine print, if you will, that occurs in that pricing schedule does exist. It is, a regulatory mandate that the credit card companies have, and they need to communicate that to consumers. So to the degree that consumers begin to fall behind on some of those contractual arrangements with their lenders and start to move up that pricing schedule with their credit card company, it begins to create a lot of cost. Our average consumer who comes to us, typically is already at like a 23 or 24% APR with their credit card lenders. And that's quite a bit up the pricing schedule of a typical, credit card lending pricing schedule. So, you asked about delinquency, that's 60, 90 days, maybe even out to 120 days. In some cases, people are already being charged. And if they continue to not pay that off, they're going to go all the way to the top of that pricing schedule, and then eventually they will charge off. And, as we know, there's damage that occurs to credit score when it gets to be that bad. So the idea is with credit counseling, if they have the combination of creditors and the delinquencies are not too bad, we can get them on what is called a debt management plan. DMPs are the bread and butter of the credit counseling industry. We've been using DMPs since the early 1950s, so it's a tried and true mechanism that creditors accept, and they partner with us and the consumer on. And what that does is that allows the consumer to be managed by credit counseling, and they are given a hardship level of interest rate based on their situation. Different creditors offer different interest rate levels, but the average goes from about 23 or 24% down to about 8% in that hardship interest scenario on average. And that difference between 8 and 24% is a significant amount of monthly interest that's saved. And to the degree that the budget can be reworked based on that savings, the consumer has an opportunity to begin to work out their situation over time and pay off that debt. as such that they can avoid, major credit score damage.
Interesting. And so what is the person's obligation as to participate in these DMPs? Is that what you call debt management program, correct?
Right, correct. I mean, it's strictly voluntary. The consumer, has the choice of participating in a debt management plan, or, they may choose to take their chances, with working things out individually with their creditor. Depending on, the strategy that's employed with that creditor, that could take a lot of different forms. If they don't go on a debt management plan, they might continue to receive, a lot of inbound phone calls from their creditor asking for payment. There may be letters that occur that kind of show them going through the delinquency cycle and an escalating set of letters that occur. So these contacts, can serve as, a concern for people. They may be behind in their affairs with other creditors, so they get, multiple calls coming in from individual creditors. What credit counseling does is solve on the whole body of those creditors. So the advice that's given gives that person a path to navigate with all their different creditors, such that they don't have to deal with all of it. They can get some help from the credit counseling entity that's used to dealing with these creditors and know how they operate. We're in partnership with these creditors, but we work for the consumer, and we help the consumer navigate that, especially if they're, uncertain as to what applies with different combinations of creditors.
And if somebody is participating in one of your programs, is there an impact to their credit score? Like how should someone think about like their credit score during this time frame? Right.
It's a great question, and it's really dependent upon, how far behind that they get. That's why I was saying starting early really can help, because if you miss one payment or if you miss two payments, you start to do some credit score damage as part of that process. If you start to miss, 4, 5, 6 payments, then the credit score damage gets to be much more severe. So the idea is to minimize those missed payments as best you can and early in the process. If it goes so far beyond where you're missing multiple payments with multiple creditors, and then eventually those debts charge off and become, permanently written off by the creditors, that's when you're looking at significant credit score breakage and a type of repair that has to take place over many months, if not years. So those are the types of things that we attempt to avoid in this process, especially for people that have the wherewithal and the combination of income and minimization of expenses to the place where we can get them rehabilitated. That's a best case scenario. But if you start to get into a lot of charged off accounts, it'll start to take the shape of, somebody filing bankruptcy or, maybe doing credit damage that takes years to recover from. So in a perfect world, we avoid that.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. So if I were to just think about what you've shared, first, that we'd want folks to know that the NFCC is a nonprofit organization that anyone has access to. The organization will help the individual get a better understanding of their financial picture, and if it makes sense, could help them enroll in a debt management program, which will help them reduce their interest, potentially reduce payments, and try to get them through this period of time. Is that a fair assessment of your role?
Absolutely. Our agencies have, an obligation to serve, and that goes consistent with our nonprofit status because we have these relationships with the banks. We have a great deal of understanding of a wide variety of creditors. And that helps us too with navigating what is, oftentimes a very complicated world of, credit card and creditor collections and recovery. It's complicated, so to the degree that somebody can, tap into that expertise of a credit counselor, we can help people navigate that. Like I said, sometimes people are encountering this for the first time and they don't really know what's going to happen. And that credit counseling counselor can be a trusted partner that knows the way and can help apply what they know to that consumer's individual situation. Most of the people who come to credit counseling have multiple credit card debts that they owe. Our average consumer has about $15,000 in delinquent balance, and that is usually spread out over about 5 or 6 cards. So when you start to think about those average balances and some of the delinquency that's occurring there, it's a serious situation. And to the degree that we can help somebody salvage that, and we do every day, that's what we do, it can be a real life changer, because as people, encounter credit score damage, what that does is that pushes up their cost of credit going forward. So if you have credit score damage, you may be able to get additional credit, but that credit is going to cost you. And that becomes difficult for somebody in a limited income situation to pay higher amounts for that credit.
Yep, that makes total sense. So if you had only one word of advice to give people who are experiencing a financial setback that prevents them from being able to pay and keep up with their bills and debts, what would it be?
Well, one word, I think it's breathe. Take a deep breath and try to relax a little bit, because I know that the folks that are encountering financial stress, it's something that can be very debilitating, and it can be overwhelming. And being in the roles that I was in for the better part of 20 years in collections and recovery, I dealt with a lot of these folks personally. And I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, geez, I'm going to look to try to get behind in my affairs. It's not something that we set out to do, but it does happen. And what people need to understand is that there are people out there that can help you. As complicated as your situation may seem, there are answers and solutions out there. And that is the step toward recovery, is to start to tap into some of those sources so that, it doesn't have to seem so overwhelming. So take a deep breath and then start to reach out to those experts. Certainly credit counseling and NFCC agencies exist as some of that expertise, but they're not the only ones. Many credit card companies have lots of information on their websites about how to navigate that path with lenders. So, you can do some self-servicing and be informed with that type of process. You can also talk to family and talk to friends who've maybe been through these situations. They might not have even told you about it, but they're willing to help, So you have those sources that you can maybe tap into that gives that a feeling of more empowerment. And with empowerment, you can begin to do something.
Awesome. So with that, we'll wrap up this edition of Just Ask. And I thank you very much, Pete, for joining us today. It was great having you and great advice, and I think our folks will really benefit from it. We're going to be continuing this series in the coming weeks, and we're going to be bringing you more experts to answer your questions and help to get you feedback on your finances and get you back on track. Pete, I think I'd like to we talked about maybe doing one more session with you. If you as a viewer have any questions or areas that you are financially struggling with and would like us to tackle them in one of our upcoming videos, please let us know by reaching out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. And until then, stay safe, be healthy. Thanks, Pete. Cheers.
Thank you. Good seeing you, Sabrina. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Yep. Bye now.